faith, family, freedom, hope, and opportunity. You're listening to Freedom Rings. I'm your host, Senator Marsha Blackburn. Today we have a wonderful guest for our Freedom Rings podcast. She is a problem solver, a barrier breaker. I like to say that she is the chief mama in charge, and she's adding to that list U.S. Senate candidate for the state of Washington. Tiffany Smiley, I am delighted that you are joining us for Freedom Rings. Thank you so much. And let's start right there at the top. Why are you running for U.S. Senate, and why do you want to serve?
Yes, thank you, Senator Blackburn. Sometimes I reflect, especially, just being on the campaign trail for so long, and never in a million years did I think that my life would lead into politics. I just wanted to be a nurse and wanted to serve people. And really, my fight began 17 years ago when my husband, Scotty, who was a West Point grad, was blinded in Iraq by a suicide car bomb. And I resigned from my nursing job. At 23 years old, I took a one-way flight out to Walter Reed Army Medical Center to meet Scotty. He was in a coma. He had tubes coming out of every orifice of his body. He was paralyzed on the right side. And one thing was certain was that he would never see again. And so really, 17 years ago is when my fight began, in my fight for what's right and for, just service. I went from serving a lot of patients to one. I was certain I could help Scotty. But I always wondered about everyone else. And so that's, what emboldened my spirit to never give up, to never quit fighting, that sort of nurse mentality, a trained advocate, an educated advocate. That's something that nurses are really, really. And so, it was really in my fight for veterans and standing up to the VA that I realized that we have so much more to be fighting for. And like you mentioned in the intro, I'm a mom of 3 young boys. And I'm deeply worried about their future in Washington state and in this country. And, if our family doesn't get in this fight, who does? If not us, then who? And it's time to stand up and fight for our children and grandchildren for generations to come. So we're led by service, by servant leadership. And that's certainly why I'm standing up and taking on this fight for United States Senate.
We are so delighted that you are. Let's back this up a little bit. As you're growing up, what led you to want to be a nurse?
It's interesting. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And certainly, I didn't have much, but what I did have was a lot of freedom. So I'm not afraid of much, to be honest. When you have to get back on horses that buck you off, and you get kicked by steers that you're raising, and you have to go back out the next day and do it again, it sort of makes you tough. But ever since I was in kindergarten, I wrote in my book that what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote that I wanted to be a nurse. And there was no question when I graduated that, I would go to nursing school, and I received my bachelor's in science in nursing and looked forward to furthering my education and my nursing career. I loved helping people. I loved solving problems. And I loved working as a nurse, but in some ways, I didn't know my nursing career would lead me to politics, but I think I can do a lot of good work in the government as well.
So you finish high school and you go to college, and you finish and get a doctorate of nursing, and you're beginning to practice nursing, and your husband is injured. And as you said, you take a one-way flight all the way across the country to go be at his side and help him. And during that, trying to help him get the care that he needed there at Walter Reed, you were presented with an option, which was to remove him from the U.S. military. You want to talk about what transpired there?
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes I joke that, I had graduated with my bachelor's in science and nursing. Scotty was a newly commissioned officer from the United States Military Academy. My new last name was Smiley. When we got married, it was a picture of the American dream, and we had it all ahead of us. But yes, at 23 years old, I resigned from my nursing job, took a one-way flight to Walter Reed. It was certain that this would take all of me. I knew I wasn't going back to my nursing career. And I was very quickly brought into a room after I arrived at Walter Reed, since I had power of attorney. Is something you do before a loved one goes overseas. And so I had power of attorney. And, Army officials, hospital officials brought me in a room. They said, Mrs. Smiley, sign right here on the dotted line, and we'll begin your husband's transition into the VA system. And we can start looking at long-term care facilities. But I said, wait a minute, that nurse in me kicked in. I was like, I have a lot of questions. And I truly believed, that there had to be a better way to do this. There had to be, I had just walked in and told Scotty, he whispered in his ear, in his coma-like state, that he would never see again. And now I was being asked to go in and tell him that I just retired him from the very thing that gave him purpose and something to fight for. And I knew in some ways, had I signed that, that it would be a death sentence for Scotty. And so I refused to sign it. I believed in a better vision. I believed, that Scotty should have, access to any resource, job training, any care that he would need to get back on his feet. And my suggestion was simply, let's let him fully recover. And if he wants to serve, he can still serve. If he wants to continue to serve our country, let's give him that option as well. So I refused to sign the paperwork. And, in some ways, the doctors looked at me like, oh, you're cute and you're sweet. And, you're going through a lot right now, Mrs. Smiley, but this is what everyone does, sign right here on the dotted line. And I refused a second time. And it gave me the opportunity to build a coalition with others that saw this vision as well and believed in it. And Scotty went on and became the first blind active duty officer to ever serve our country, something that had never been done before. And not only that, it started to really change the Army's view of how we handle and treat our catastrophically injured veterans and their families. So while not an easy path, we are super grateful for the opportunity to fight and break through barriers that didn't just change our lives, but thousands of others as well.
And Scotty, as you said, was the first blind active duty Army officer. And then talk a little bit about his career and how he was able to continue that service.
Yes, so we served our country. I always say we because it's absolutely a team effort. Military spouses are the backbone of this country. They sacrifice, they give up, they manage the family, the budgets, the household, careers, jobs, everything. And so we served for a whole decade with Scotty completely blind. We moved 8 times in 10 years. Followed along that whole military path. Scotty went back to Duke and got his MBA. I guess I earned an honorary MBA because
Indeed, I would say probably so. So he finishes out his career and retires. And then as you all are continuing to break barriers and help other veterans to break barriers and other active duty military to get the care that they are needing, the opportunities that they have earned. Yes. Then Tiffany one day says, you know what? I think I'm ready for another challenge. So what led you to say, I'm going to make this race for U.S. Senate?
Yes, it's truly in that fight for the VA when Scotty was going to retire as a major and came up against bureaucratic red tape after red tape. And I realized, if Scotty's feeling this and there's thousands of others. So I took another flight to Washington, D.C., but this time I had a round trip ticket. And I went to Washington, D.C. to fight for our veterans and move the needle in the VA for our veterans and their families. And, it was in that fight that I realized we have so much more to be fighting for. Patty Murray has been in office here in Washington State for almost 30 years, and I wish that we were better off. I really wish that we were thriving here. I believe in a Washington State where our children just don't live and survive, but they thrive, that we lead the country in energy, and that people are wanting to move to Washington State because it's the best place to live. And it's just, our education is bad on every front. All three of my boys are in the public school system. Here in Washington State, we just hit over $5 a gallon for gas. I mean, a record that we've never had before. So when you start to look at everything that was happening, especially after these last 2 years where our children struggled here in Washington State, our family knew that it was time to step up and fight. We are great in this country. Our country is great because we never give in to status quo. And that's why I'm fighting this fight, because when you have the opportunity to do what's right, you always do it. That's certainly what we teach our children. And that's why we're in this fight together. I learned at a young age that when something is broken, that in this country, you can fix it. There's no barrier too big. And that's why I'm in this fight to run for Senate.
Well, we certainly are cheering you on every step of the way. And I know that a lot of people across this country are cheering you on because you have helped to make their lives better, because you've taught them how to fight back against the Department of Defense and the VA to get what our brave men and women in uniform have earned by their service. As we close out, tell me what freedom means to you.
Freedom to me is this country. I think of America. I think, I think of our service members through all, the years who have signed up and said yes to serve for, just freely.
Yeah. Willingly. They willingly raise their hand and take that oath. That's right.
They do. And what a great country we have. When I think of America, I think of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
And that was everything I wanted to fight for Scotty when he was in that hospital bed and couldn't fight for himself. That's everything I want to fight for our children and their future. That freedom is America. And we are the shining beacon on the hill. And, I can't help but also think of what Ronald Reagan said so perfectly, that we are always just one generation away from losing our freedom. And that we instill that in the next generations, that we have competitive quality education in this country that gives our children a fighting advantage in the future global economy, that we have, business friendly approaches here in Washington State, that when, unfortunately, when we go out of our doors today, we face the record level of crime and inflation, but I cannot wait to serve and have Washington families open their doors and experience life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well, I know that's going to be is something in your future, and we're going to look forward to having you in the U.S. Senate. Now, I know our podcast audience is going to want to keep up with you as you go through this campaign. I know they're going to want to learn more about you. So on Twitter, they're going to find you at Smiley for WA, and on Facebook, Tiffany Smiley, and on the website, your campaign website at smileyforwashington.com. Tiffany, it is such a pleasure to talk with you. You truly are a happy warrior, freedom fighter, barrier breaker, and chief mama in charge. And we're going to add U.S. Senator to that title. And thank you so much for joining us on Freedom Rings. Thank you for listening to this episode of Freedom Rings. You can follow me on Twitter at Vote Marsha, Facebook at Marsha Blackburn for Senate, and on Instagram at Team Marsha. And you can always find us online at marshablackburn.com. The Freedom Rings podcast is edited and produced by Jared Cummings. Executive producers are Conservative Partnership Center and Marsha Blackburn. Together, we make Freedom Ring.